Well, it's really a pleasure to see so many friends and colleagues here. Let me thank Barbara, Chris, and Elliot for the invitation. This is really a strategically important meeting for the profession, I think. Very timely. And Barbara thought that Ray Paulson's quote that I put on the first transparency here captures the mood of this event. Evaluation cannot hope for perfect objectivity, but neither does it mean that we should slump into rampant subjectivity. Fine, but why am I talking about a war? What kind of war am I talking about? Well, it's a semantic war. Wittgenstein said that don't look for the meaning, look for the use. And it's a war about what is impact. How do we define it? It's a war between the DAC definition and the 3IE definition. By now, we all agree that we need to mix methods. But whether we are the cooks or the consumer or the evaluation soup, we still do not have, and probably we should not have, standard recipes. We do have a lot of cookbooks, textbooks, a lot of doctrines, a lot of tools. But the thing I want to really focus on is, do we have the right menu? Or are, in the work we do, serving steak at a vegetarian convention? The thing is, what should be the menu of development evaluation? This is what I would like to explore with you. Well, this is really, I was asked to put a little storyline as what I want to talk about. So let me get into it right away. Let me start with the concept of path dependence. Fighting the last war is what path dependence means. History matters. As Mark Twain said, history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. The notion that circumstances change, and even the best decisions made in the past have a short shelf life. So past decisions shape institutions and behavior and impose limits or even distort the decisions we are making today. Thus, when the terrain is new, the adversary have changed, the techniques of war have evolved. I try to bring in evaluation in the war studies department at King very unsuccessfully. That's why development evaluation started with McNamara, who, as you know, was the defense secretary. So these metaphors come easily to me. So the terrain is new, adversary have changed, techniques of war have evolved. If you fight the last war, you tend to lose. And Rick Davis' recent blog on decision trees points to one way of figuring out path dependence. And so it is for development theory, which is in crisis at the moment, following the 2008 crisis, and also for evaluation, and therefore the intersection of development evaluation, which intersect two disciplines in a sense which are in ebullition, in the total stage of reconsideration. We have a lot to think about, and I think this is why this workshop is so timely. The path dependence also has to do with the interface between summative and formative evaluation. Facile, tired, vague, tautological evaluation lessons come again and again in evaluation reports. And they tend to be, and so the best evaluators, I think, are very cautious in offering recommendations because of the fact that you cannot extrapolate always a path into the future. It's a very tricky business. And so longitudinally speaking, internal validity does not translate into external validity. In other words, a great summative evaluation is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition to make a formative evaluation. I think it's this kind of interface that I hope this workshop will probe. What worked yesterday may not work tomorrow. What did not work yesterday could, with luck, work tomorrow. well, as the French like to say, one may even be wrong by being right too early. So the risks of path dependence impact on the evaluation discipline itself. And that's what I'm saying about fighting the last war. We tend to repeat what we know and where we have been, and trying to get out of this path dependence is why Barbara and Chris and Elliot set this up. That's why we are here. It is a serious threat. If we keep fighting the last war, we are not going to go forward. So the framers of the workshop did not only look back about the impact debate, they also looked ahead and brought you in, and you are all laboring at the frontier of evaluation knowledge, and our discipline is embattled. So we have come together not only to discuss impact, but also to address learning and innovation, as Elliot just said. So the impact evaluation debate is over. I mean, basically, this workshop wants to lay the foundation of a research and practice agenda for impact evaluation. This suggests a focus on results and methods. So continuing with this warfare analogy, basically, the focus is on tactics, perhaps, but only if methods are judiciously selected, skillfully deployed, and put on the circuit of the right strategy, will we have a resilient discipline looking ahead. Now, looking back, evaluating the impact of discrete interventions has dominated the debate. So the skirmishes continue about 3IE and DAC and so forth. But these skirmishes have finally become peripheral. We have diminishing returns, argumentative gridlocks, and overall fatigue in this whole debate. And of course, causal inference has long been and continue to be a focus of methodological inquiry. It has always been, it always will be. We are still struggling with the same kind of issues that started, evaluation pioneers, when Donald Campbell talked about the experimental society. But, by now the potentials and limitations of the experimental approach have been thoroughly probed. We have, the Elliott-Stern gang produced as definitive and balanced a state-of-the-art review as we are likely to get. And, their landmark document, I think, should consolidate the truths and that has prevailed ever since Yoni delivered his verdict in 2009. It's time to abandon the medical model fetish, to respect the truths brokered by Franz Lou, Joe Bassett, and also Elliott Stern. And we need to open new fronts for our fledgling discipline. Now, still, it may be useful, perhaps, to discuss where we are and what is the content of these truths and why did the peace treaty came out the way it did. I mean, let me give you my take on it. I did an article for Evaluation on the topic, and so I'll try to be brief. But basically, randomization has considerable potential. It can help establish causality by providing a plausible measure of what results would have been observed had the intervention not taken place, by achieving comparability between control and treatment groups and so on. And so this approach is really ideal for tackling selection bias, but which really is a very serious issue. We should not disdain the fact that the randomistas are really bringing out the fact that the problem arises, as is often the case, those who have access to social programs are often richer, more powerful, more motivated, and more educated. So random assignment to the treated and non-treatment groups on the same population ensures that, except for chance fluctuations, the impact of the intervention can in fact be reliably ascertained. I mean, the beauty of this thing is that, in a sense, it produces a counterfactual, which otherwise is hard to find. What's also neat in RCTs is that you can have You can test the reliability of the findings through statistical testing techniques, so you can determine the range of confidence you can safely attribute to the results. So randomized control trials, have this tremendous appeal. I mean, it's not surprising that they are viewed, particularly given their scientific veneer, as very valid, whether they are or not valid, that they are viewed as valid by decision makers and policy makers. But, so they have tremendous advantages, but there are also huge disadvantages to this approach. I mean, do they work in assessing the impact of the local interventions? Sometimes, but not very often. They can only be used if the context is stable, the intervention is fixed and well defined. They are redundant when no other plausible explanation for the results is available. I mean, you don't need RCTs to assess the time saved by women as a result of an investment in a new village water pump as an alternative to walking all the way to the river. You cannot randomize the location of an infrastructure project. You cannot, if you have full coverage, when the intervention covers the whole country, say a new speed limit, regulation, it's not easy to do an RCT. And of course, we all know how difficult it is to establish attribution and how really you can construct this treatment and control groups. But more fundamentally, I mean, poverty is not a disease and development aid is not a drug. I mean, basically, you have unintended side effects, you have society is not a lab, you cannot control what's going on there as the program develops. You have reflexivity, the so-called beneficiaries are part of the whole thing, and how they react to programs matters. If you have a lot of feedback, you get instability, unintended consequences, and external validity is really the great weakness of experimental methods. Context matters. And so, in the end, this approach does not meet the needs of policymakers who, as Chris said, are concerned not so much in what works, but whether they can work in a small experiment, but whether they can be replicated in a diverse, volatile implementation environment. And there are, of course, the ethical problems that we all know about. In some jurisdictions, RCTs are illegal in a sense, and so forth. And finally, you need superior skills, large studies, large samples, specialized quality assurance arrangements, and these may not be available in real-life situations, and in fact, they may distort allocation of evaluation resources. And in particular, they tend to put developing countries' evaluators at a disadvantage. On the other hand, the flip side is that without a theory that has survived random validity tests, there is no credible causal explanation that adds to knowledge. A deep understanding of how a program operates is critical, and the validity of the theory on which it's predicated must be established before you go quantitative. And so, to get an adequate understanding of causal relationships, identifying the rival explanations that need to be refuted or confirmed, goes for really deep knowledge of the intervention, its design, its history, its implementation protocols, the incentives of program participants, and this is the unchallenged province of qualitative methods. Involve participation, observation, analysis of texts, village meetings, open-ended interviews. So qualitative data collection requires coding, of course, and you can quantify quality, and it's useful to do so. It may also be important to figure out why things did not happen. Rob Vandenberg is writing a paper about the importance of identifying theories of no change, which I think is a good point. I mean, basically, he's asking the question, why programs that should have worked did not work. due to implementation problems or exogenous shocks. So I think we do have a large set of ingredients for cooking the soup. I mean, and I think there is a lot of value to rigorously conducted case studies. They are exceptionally well equipped, and in that sense, evaluation at intervention level, if conducted, as a case study, it can be very, very helpful to illuminate the reasons for success or failure of achieving intended effects, as well as the extent and nature of unintended effects, secondary effects, and so on, direct definition. It can help discriminate between design issues, conflicting values of stakeholders, implementation problems, skill shortages, misguided processes. In that sense, we are a good counterpart to auditors who take the protocols for granted most of the time. So, many of us have gone through our whole career without ever using a randomized control trial, and I think that's fine. I mean, contribution analysis, I think, is a very promising area. There's a special issue that Elliot has put together which really explores how contribution analysis is a very useful complement to attribution analysis. And I think, the threat to good evaluation management, or the threat to the program that this new center is going to look at, is overinvestment in a single technique, because we do have, as you have the list here, quite a wide range of approaches on which you can tap. And I think evaluability assessments have also become quite popular, but they may have unintended effects as well. Because if you privilege public interventions that can be evaluated through experimental methods, for example, or any other method, you may in fact be distorting the choice of programs and select programs which are poorly suited to the context. And the fact is, particularly RCTs, are very poorly suited to the evaluation of adaptable, complicated, complex programs in a unstable environment, and this is what development almost invariably is about, and this is also where our knowledge gaps are the deepest. And this, colleagues and friends, is why you have come together here in Brighton, and you are here to plan the next campaign and not to relive or simulate the last war. So, all development interventions are complex, and as Patrick Moynihan said, the essence of tyranny is the denial of complexity. From this vantage point, the perspectives offered by the complexity science and system thinking hold considerable attraction. They embrace pluralism, inclusivity of methods, they adopt networks as a privileged unit of account, they explore interrelationship, they engage with multiple actors, they use concepts, symbols, maps, diagrams to guide inquiry, they model the multiple loops that illuminate a change preoccupation from attribution to contribution. And they draw on all evaluation traditions, theories of change, realist evaluation, critical evaluation models, focus on the overt and covert pressures that shape society. Looking ahead, complexity theory and system thinking will induce a convergence between development evaluation and what Mike Patton calls developmental evaluation. Many of us here really subscribe to Paulson's critical realist principles, to the notion that Bhaskar pointed out that theory without experiment is empty, and experiment without theory is blind. We are also committed to Campbell's dictum that to rule out plausible hypotheses, we need situation-specific wisdom. But this being said, it only takes us so far. We still cannot answer Carol Weiss's question, which links in which theories should we evaluate and how. So complexity concepts and systems thinking really offer tantalizing insights, but really at a high, let's admit it, at a very high level of abstraction. I think there is no obvious roadmap yet. That's what we want to try to figure out in this workshop to bring us where we want to go. I think we face a long twilight struggle to get to the top of the complexity hill. In the meantime, to use Michael Patton's words, we will have to bricoler, as the French say, bricolage, that is muddling through. That is where, unfortunately, we are or fortunately, we are in this whole systems thinking approach. Having come to terms with the reality that most high-level policies, programs, and projects are now privileged by international development agencies, and these are not evaluable through experimental methods. So we need to explore new evaluation frontiers. But methods are about tactics, and tactics only work if they are selected to serve the right strategy, a strategy that makes sense in the current development environment. And this is what I want to explore with you. I mean, in a sense, I don't have obviously an answer to this question. I just have, some tentative hypothesis. I would argue that looking ahead on an evaluation agenda to assess impact in the back sense should meet three criteria. First, it should put values at the very center of the strategy. Second, it should accurately reflect the new development agenda beyond the 2015 finishing line of the Millennium Development Goals. And third, it should come to terms with the realities of an aid enterprise in turmoil and a reconsideration of the ultimate goals of development cooperation. So let me briefly go over these three essential policy directions, which I think ought to be kept in mind as we try to sketch the menu for development evaluation. Why should values come first? And why, is this focus on values at this particular point in time? It really has to do, in terms of the public opinion, with the crisis, the 2008 crisis, which brought into focus the unfair social arrangements and dysfunctional governance practices that have allowed a few individuals to accumulate enormous wealth while depriving large segments of the world population of decent livelihoods. In rich and poor countries alike, the problems of others have become our own, where you take the Arab Street, the South African mining communities, Occupy Wall Street movement, the social arrangements and government practices, which I've just mentioned, have spawned widespread popular anger and resentment. Unless evaluators respond to the popular clamor for more equitable and sustainable policies, I think our discipline will gradually lose its legitimacy. Differences in income and wealth attributed to effort, skill, and entrepreneurship are not resented. But public indignation spreads and social cohesion is undermined, when distorted rules of the game, predatory economic behavior, and unethical practices are richly rewarded. 0.5% hold well over a third of the world's wealth. 0.5%, a third of the world, and 68% share only 4% of the world's wealth. So this is what Joseph Stiglitz said, there are moments in history when people all over the world seem to rise up to say that something is wrong. We are living such a moment, and evaluators have got to face up to it as well. I mean, we are as citizens, but also as evaluators. I mean, how did the hell did this happen? Why did it happen? How come we don't, put these values at the center of what we do? So evaluation cannot be value neutral. I mean, this is what distinguishes evaluation from the social sciences. I mean, value is at the core of evaluation, right? And so evaluators will have to give much greater weight and more explicitly and without shame to ethical values and social justice imperatives, much more than they have done recently. Anchoring evaluation in commitments to democracy, social justice, empowerment, and equality, I mean, is desirable. I mean, when we put up the when we had a lot of debate on competencies and capabilities in the European Evaluation Society, as well as in UK Evaluation Society, there was a lot of debate as to whether or not we should say, as part of the disposition of an evaluator, is the commitment to values, and to democratic values, and particularly which after all underlie the European Union. So delivering results in evaluation matters, but whose results? And to which actor should they be attributed? Methodological biases have given pride of place to methods that cannot contribute meaningfully to the assessment of the full coverage policies and the global policies which are leading to the impact on the poor. We have kept away from looking at these big issues, we have been mostly preoccupied with the use of aid funds by developing countries, while delivery mechanisms and non-aid policies shaped by donor countries have escaped similar scrutiny. More attention has been devoted to assessing developing countries' performance than the fulfillment of donor countries' reciprocal partnership obligations. I consider the Paris Declaration evaluation to be a farce, in the sense that it really essentially left the donors off the hook. And as Alison Evans said, this was an evaluation by adjectives. So I think, we can talk about this, but the fact is that most evaluators are fee dependent. They have been prone to frame the evaluations to meet program managers' needs and concerns rather than the concerns of citizens. They have found ample justification for this stance in the organizational manner, the MBA literature, in utilization-focused stuff of Michael Patton. So evading and downplaying the summative dimension of evaluation in order to make evaluation findings palatable to the clients does not serve to make authority responsible or responsive to the public interest. If you look at the guiding principles of American Evaluation Association, it urges evaluators to meet legitimate clients' needs wherever it is feasible and appropriate to do so. In a way, that phrasing cannot be faulted, but it still highlights the primacy of the Evaluation Commission. It has led to a market-based evaluation system that is not always compatible with the public interest. So giving pride of place to the utilization of evaluation results by program managers and policy makers is a slippery slope. It is undermining evaluation independence. The unintended consequence has been a neglect of social dimension of policies and programs. So bringing values back from the cold implies a more activist evaluation stance that challenges the client-controlled, goal-based, methods-obsessed approaches that currently dominate our field. Evaluators will need to seek inspiration from the ethical imperatives and contemporary ideas about social justice. I mean, we had a lot of social science research in this area, which evaluators should become more familiar with. Evaluators will have to develop metrics consistent with the pursuit of more equitable, inclusive, and environmentally sustainable growth, and they will have to give higher priority to the global dimensions of policies and programs that underlie the current predicament. So yes, we need to adapt to an emerging development consensus. Without the right values, we will not prevail, but failure will also lurk if we fail to adopt a strategy that does not reflect current shifts in policy paradigms. Already by specifying a wide range of socio-economic indicators, the MDGs displace economic growth. It was about time as the dominant objective of development, even though evaluators, surveys still stick to this narrow economist approach. National income is not a good proxy. We know this for economic and social performance, and we need to take much account of environmental losses, social inequities, and the human insecurities associated with unbridled growth. Current energy, natural resource intensive are not sustainable. 5 planets would be needed to accommodate all countries at current US standards of living, and we have global warming, and to get the resources, I mean, again, another statistic about inequality. A year ago, there were 1,200 billionaires, only 1,200. They have combined fortune of 4.5 trillion, which is over half the net worth of 3 billion people. Now, these glaring inequalities, combined with the collapse of the financial system, have really shaken policy complacency. And the Queen did ask LSE, why didn't you think about this? What happened? So really, we are now at a stage of what is development? I mean, the dominance of the Western economic model has been shaken. I mean, I remember in the 80s, we were worried about the highly indebted developing countries and how they should, quote unquote, adjust. And it's very much what's happening now in Europe. I mean, the North-South model that characterized international relations has become anachronistic. As you know, China's GDP already exceeds Japan, and Brazil overtaking France. I mean, development as we know it, the North-South model is no more. I mean, it's gone. I mean, we have got to rethink all this. And of course, it's quality growth one would like to revive. And development thinking is evolving. I mean, given the fact that it has failed at the more macro level, it went to microeconomics. And this is, in a way, how Esther Duflo achieved this tremendous profile that the Poverty Lab has in MIT and so on. But, Amartya Sen, has a right definition about development. He equates development with freedom. And which means the conception of human development should, as Robert Chambers has articulated for a very long time, it's about time that we should be informed what the poor themselves have to say about their own distinctive predicaments. We should also look much more than a human development approach, which assumed we had the answers to risks connected to volatility, insecurities of the global economic system. The point I'm making is that evaluation has to adapt to these emerging development paradigms. So beyond income, health conditions, housing, employment, social cohesion, environmental quality, quality of life indicators, we have to really sort this out to try to find metrics for the new development paradigm. I don't know how this is to be done, but IDS, put out an interesting paper. Mr. McGregor and Andy Sumner, who, by the way, Andy is now at King's College, the new International Development Institute, with which I am associated with. They have offered a different view about human well-being as the objective of development, which triggered in my mind, what does that model have to say about evaluation? Anyway, what you have here is work in progress in a sense, but what this kind of matrix brings out is that if you took material well-being, relational well-being, which evokes system theory, perceptual well-being as well. That means, in terms of evaluation, you have to multidisciplinary, multimodal, and multi-level approach to evaluation. We could spend more time on this, but we don't have it. Third, I think development evaluation should take on board the obvious fact that the aid architecture is completely different when it was like 10, 15 years ago. It is more and more fragmented, and the momentum which led aid to grow when the MDGs came about is unraveling. Aid is becoming more and more an instrument of geopolitics. The UK claims to be an aid superpower, a revealing phrase. Basically, we just hear that SIDA is going to be absorbed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So basically, aid has become subservient to other goals of foreign policy establishments, opening up new markets, secure access to natural resources. We have been there before. If you look at development history, we have had cycles. We are now in a downward cycle along those lines, and particularly the global war on terror, which has no end and fiercely resists objective assessment, means that aid is becoming more and more subservient to the powerful. So we need to take that into account if indeed we want to have values at the center of what we do. Finally, we have got to look at aid intervention as they really are. They are increasingly channeled through large, diffuse, adaptable country-based programs or vertical multi-country initiatives involving multiple actors. The broad-based aid coalitions that are increasingly operating across borders to tackle these problems about passport that Kofi Annan talked about, we have to contend with the rules of the game set by multi-sector networks. Complex political equations underlie their operations, and these cannot be solved through abstract and mutual scientific experiments. On the other hand, they can be evaluated in systems terms. And also, we must shift gears from aid evaluation to development evaluation. We can discuss what this means. I'll tell you my take on this transition from aid evaluation to development evaluation. The Busan Declaration promotes a shift in the paradigm from aid effectiveness to development effectiveness. And in a sense, this is revolutionary for the evaluation agenda. We can no longer evaluate aid interventions as discrete, isolated interventions. Development cooperation is now a web of partnerships involving state-based structures, private corporations, foundations, civil society groups. Systems thinking is better suited to figuring them out than simple linear models. Basically, the non-aid links have become major mechanism of resource transfer, and just look at the data I have here, which shows how minuscule the aid budget really is. Compared to other aspects of globalization, which transfer resources from rich to poor countries, mostly the other way. So I think really trying to figure out the impact of these broad policy, because all of these things are governed by rules of the game. They are not exogenous. They don't come from God. All of these flows are governed by specific standards and specific protocols in the interaction between nations. And that's why policy coherence for development, which to its credit the OECD Secretariat has developed, represents a very important framework to take account of as we look at where development evaluation is going. So, it's time for me to conclude. I would say that even the best methods cannot compensate for misguided evaluation strategy. We need an agenda adapted to our troubled times, which emphasizes ethical standards, democratic values. It should reflect the human well-being paradigm that is gaining currency in development circles, and we started right here in IDS. It would come to terms with the realities of fractured aid architecture and the development cooperation agenda that reaches well beyond aid. These policy directions imply increasing resource complexity, science system thinking, greater independence in evaluation processes. We need to professionalize our discipline so that we are a bit more independent and can live up to our values. We need more attention to the political and social aspects of development policies and programs, and we should resort fully to multidisciplinary approaches. Well, this is in a nutshell what I have to say. I thank you for your attention. I look forward really very much to a fulsome debate about the proposition that I put forward and also this very exciting agenda that Barbara has put together. Thank you very much.
Are you okay to take questions and answers at this stage? So thank you, Bob. You covered, as always, an interesting and huge ground for us to cover, and I think touched on a number of really critical points. So if you're okay to take questions and answers there.
You had a throwaway line at the beginning, Bob, which was development theory is in crisis. You then vaguely referred back to it when you said what is development, and you quoted largely normative statements about that. You quoted Sen, Chambers, and Gregor, Sumner. And what it highlighted for me because I'm carrying in my head this link between this event and research agendas, is the connection between the evaluation project, not only in terms of architecture and institutions and funding streams, but also in terms of what we are evaluating, is also a certain theory and understanding of the nature of development. So you seem to be highlighting the fact that we are, if not in the wilderness on that in general, certainly at a transition point where some of the assumptions that we make have failed to live up to expectations. Have you done any more thinking about that, or am I merely just flagging something that many people would acknowledge? And I was thinking also at the same time that a couple of very prominent economists at the World Bank were thrown out because they admitted publicly that they didn't really know how to make development happen despite all the investment in those areas. So I'm flagging the issue, and I'm wondering whether you've done more thinking about it.
Yes, let's see this, that there has been a war inside the economics establishment in development economics between the macro people and the micro people. And what happened is that once the Washington consensus was shown to be deficient, and that this whole conditionality approach to adjustment during the 80s and so on really it worked in some places, but didn't work in many others. The crisis has shaken the thing up, and the micro people took over. The microeconomists took over. And that's how the RCT movement started and became very powerful. So instead of opening up the debate, the macro people in a sense gave up, and the micro people took over, but their economies are not evaluators. And that means, to me, that it is a tremendous opportunity for the discipline. Because what is now very clear is that these general lessons, or general through cross-sectional analysis and cross-country analysis and all, delivered nothing about aid effectiveness. We now know it. So people like William Easterly and others are saying, look, we don't really know. Big ideas don't work anymore. We don't know anything. So, and that's opened up this whole thing of looking more modestly, which is a good thing, at what development is. But then they picked on the medical model, and they said so. Professor Duflo made it very clear. She looked at applying the medical model without understanding what the medical model, all the problems of the medical model is. So to me, we now know that evaluation, has an edge over economics because it's multidisciplinary, because we know we have bring in sociology, realist evaluation, and so forth. So particularly, given the broader agenda that you mentioned about development as freedom and listening to the poor. So I would say that, as the Chinese says, the crisis is also an opportunity, and the crisis in development theory is a plus for evaluation, because our time is here, and I think that also explains why demand for evaluation is moving up everywhere. And we have a critical problem of supply of evaluators to meet the demand, real evaluators who really know what they are doing. So, training in evaluation, I think, is becoming very important. But, I'm only touching very narrowly, perhaps, on the question you raised earlier. Others have a better answer to what you ask.
Can we take other questions on the floor? Just need to take the mic.
I was just interested in hearing more about your advocating to look at evaluations outside of just the aid architecture. I totally agree. I'm just interested in a paradigm where donors are very keen to sort of look at every impact their money has spent, and there's very much sort of territorial approach to evaluation. Have you got any ideas, and also the nature of the debate with publics and what have you, about how they understand what aid does and the aid actors do, about how that battle can be fought and where the needs sort of should come from?
Yeah, I think this is really the key challenge for development evaluation, is really to change the narrative and to change the question, because, you know, we have got to educate, you know, we have got to describe what's happening in the aid business in a way which is real, rather than this, does it work, does it not work? I mean, once you get into that mode, you really you are drawn to you know, stupid answers to stupid questions. Yeah? So I think, you know, we need a new narrative for aid, which describes really how it actually works, and that it is a risky business, and it's a business, but it doesn't mean it is, you know, in the music business, in the film business, all you have to do is get one blockbuster out of 10. But somehow, you know, the public expects 100% results out of it. So I think what lies behind it is really political compulsion to cut it, and that's, you know, because if you cannot prove that doesn't work, that you cut, you know, you say, where should we put the money? Instead of looking at aid as a very important catalyst, particularly in fragile states, and there's a lot of good evidence that aid really works best in vulnerable countries. Despite people thinking that these are non-performing states, precisely for that reason aid is very important. And evaluators have got not to be shy to try to educate their commissioners to change the question, or to negotiate, to broaden the question, to make it more real than simply does it work or doesn't it not work. So I don't know how you do this, but I think this is really the challenge that we face. And that's why I hope that the center does not get caught into this narrow view of impact. And I'm very, very pleased the way Chris and Elliot and Barbara have talked about this. Really, this is not the intention. I think you want to open it up rather than narrow it down further, as we are now.
Do others want to answer that question, or are there other questions in the spirit of opening it up? Let's take them on.
Hi, very interesting. On the topic of independent evaluation, you know, you sort of put independence as almost a categorical situation. You've lived the life in the World Bank, creating an independent evaluation group, and we have one that has, we faced a lot of tensions in the independence interaction with the unit. Why don't you speak a little bit about what independence actually means in the context of a big organization, and what trade-offs does one have to make, and what are acceptable trade-offs? That's one. And the other one has to do with independence and values. I completely agree with you that values are critical, but values might put limits to our independence as well, in the sense that how do we deal with the issue of is our value or your value?
Yes, I mean, these are very good questions. I don't have the answer, but you know, I think we need to do research on independence. I agree, because you know, we have a model applicable to the multilateral banks, which I think works. But that model, when we try to extrapolate it to the UN system or to the real world in Europe, for example, doesn't really work. Because I mean, the notion that, but still, the notion of separation of powers. I mean, the whole, to me, we need to go back and revisit what is democratic evaluation. I mean, democratic evaluation came up with Barry McDonald, Savile Kushner, and so on, you know, 30 years ago or something. And essentially, it's facilitation. And it has its value. In other words, as I understand it, they define democratic evaluation as a facilitator who gets the values and the whole stakeholder, facilitates a conversation. Ernest House moved beyond that and managed to get to realize that you have to have a level playing field, and that means you have to empower the weakest. And that was an advance over MacDonald, who I think naively thought that simply by facilitating the existing power structure you get democratic results. But, the question, you're really raising the question of, what is the role of the editor? So I think one thing is how to structure independence to particular organizational structures. So we need, again, there is no standard solution. You have to design it case by case. And so we need more research, and nobody seems to be interested in that. I mean, unfortunately, I hope people here will look at that. But the other thing has to do with the capabilities, the disposition of the individual evaluator. I mean, even the auditors talk about independence of mind and independence of appearance. I think we need to nurture and make, because not everybody can be an evaluator. You need courage, you need ability to operate, and you need to, and so therefore, I think so there is an element of personal responsibility here about independence. But more generally, I think organizational theory and evaluation really need much more interaction. As Rob Vandenberg's program on comprehensive evaluation, I think we need to think much more how to assess organizational performance. Charles Lusthouse, others have worked in this area. So I really would like to say that simply that on independence is a very important area, because without that, essentially we are not evaluators, we are consultants using evaluation methods, which is fine. I mean, it's perfectly honest living, but let's make a distinction between using evaluation methods and being an evaluator who takes care, who at least tries to protect the citizens. On the value side, yes, I agree. Evaluators should interact with stakeholders and take at the beginning of the evaluation process. And that's where I think systems thinking is quite important at the upfront of the evaluation, at the beginning, at the design stage. This said, I think, and that's a debate, but I think one can draw on what social justice really means. There is a whole literature on that, and we need much more debate within the evaluation profession about, yes, we should look at various stakeholders, we should empower the weakest, but also are there general principles that also we should keep in mind as we go and do our business.
I had a comment more than a question, perhaps, just noting that there are no actually representatives of 3IE here, and you talked about 3IE as one of the trenches in this war that you mentioned, and I felt obliged as a previous Deputy Executive Director of 3IE to just say a couple of things, because I find that a lot of the things you talked about in your presentation actually are quite in agreement with what 3IE promotes, because 3IE is not mainly promoting randomized control trials, and maybe somebody would get that impression after your presentation. It's also about other types of impact evaluation, of using quasi-experimental approaches, but also very much mixing that with other methods in order to look at both the effects, but also explaining why things work and didn't work, etc. So, and in addition to use theory of change to sort of inform the design of the evaluations. So I do find more commonalities with what you spoke about afterwards than in fact the sort of the trenches you laid out in the beginning.
No, let me comment on your comment. I think I did sharpen this, and that maybe I'm out of date, but I think in a way what you are describing is what I was also saying is that this war is behind us. I mean, it did it did start, I mean, let's admit it, 3IE started with a very narrow view, and in a way it has now migrated towards a consensus, and in fact had a bracing effect on profession. I mean, it made a contribution. I just wanted to simply highlight that this war is over, and that definitions matter. And I'm very glad that we're sticking to the DAC definition rather than the impact definition as simply attribution. And that's, I think, an important thing for this center to be clear at what do they mean by impact. So impact is, if you have, because I mean, Howard made it very clear at the beginning of 3IE that essentially the impact evaluation is attribution. So the question is 3IE still committed to this definition, or definitions matter? They guide what we do. And so the question, I don't know where 3IE stands, or how does 3IE define impact? Is it now coming back to the fold? Is it saying, are they accepting the DAC definition or not? Do you know the answer to that?
Well, I know the definition of it's talking about, it talks still about attribution. So it's using those methodologies that can, quantify attribution, but then it uses other methodologies in addition to explain why we find what we find. So it pushes towards the mixing of methods.
Yes, no, but the question is attribution because attribution comes back to the earlier question, does aid work? Which is a reactionary question, really, frankly. It means that if it doesn't work, close it. Instead of this is a partnership and we really are interested in development. So I think it's very important to be clear whether we have mixed methods to define attribution, or are you defining impact in terms of long-term, indirect, secondary, and so forth and so on. That is an important question. I don't think it may be not possible politically for 3IE to change that come back to the fold, and and in fact the DAC itself has succumbed to this on its website. So I think it's important to be clear as to what we mean by impact. Is really what I mean. I hope that this meeting will throw more light on that. But thank you anyway. I did caricature 3IE, and I apologize for that. But I just want to sharpen the question.
So I think there's a question from Elliot as well.
More by way of a comment, really. I mean, you used the term narrative, and I was thinking that a lot of these discussions are ultimately rhetorical. We use words in a kind of declaratory way. We slide over disagreements by saying, coming back to the fold, or the war is over. Leather Cohen's terms, the war is over, the good guys lost. I mean, I'm not convinced by some of the optimism that you inserted in there, in the sense that I do think that the war is still ongoing in many ways, and one of the ways people fight a war is to say actually the war is over. It's a bit like Talleyrand said non-intervention is that kind of intervention which we call non-intervention, which I thought was a very good way of describing that nature of that politics. And in the light of that rhetorical frame that I find this time in the morning, that I'm wanting also to respond to your point about the expectation that we get things right, that the public anxiety about donor expenditure is quite different from many other areas of scientific endeavour where we expect we don't. I found that there's a very useful rhetorical device that tends to work in that circumstance, and that is to use the merchant banker's idea that we have a profile of risk in our investment portfolio, and may well be 30% is a sure thing, and 50% is fairly sure, and there's 20% which is intentionally risky in order to make sure we have a balanced portfolio and we can invest in the future. I'm not actually advocating those numbers or even that argument as a methodological tool for people to to apply, but I am thinking that we need rhetorical tools like that in order to engage in these kinds of discussions.
Thank you. Shall we take one more question from the floor? Another comment? Shall we take one more from here? Yeah, that's great.
I just wanted to pick up on Elliot's point about the idea that the battle is won. And I was struck, and I think people in this room might be able to throw more light than I can, but I was talking to a member of the evaluation, some of the African evaluation societies recently, which I admit I was very ignorant about what important actors they are. And they were giving this impression of saying that, you know, the political economy that drives evaluation methodologies and who does the training, what kind of methodologies they're using. And they were sort of giving the impression that everybody was learning how to do random control trials and using them inappropriately. So I would sort of question that. But I was also sort of interested in the role that those societies who still say that there's no demand for evaluation within aid recipient countries because evaluation is associated with donors and aid. And they were sort of seeing their role as trying to stimulate demand from the citizens really for evaluation. What have you. I just wondered whether anybody here had any reflections on that. Which is one of the role of evaluation societies in recipient countries.
Well, I agree first with Elliot's point that the war is still going on. My point, but I think it, in a sense, intellectually at least, it's become peripheral. And we need to open up new wars in order to, new fronts in order to make sure this truth, which is a fragile truth, I agree. But I mean, you have been an architect, and Joe's, Frank Luer as well, and even the UK Treasury's guidebook. But I think keep putting a lot of focus on this debate is detracting from attention to the kind of thing that is on the agenda of this meeting. Is really the point. When I say that the war is over, I meant it should be over, not that it is actually over. But I think what the second comment I think is quite interesting and important, because I think as in a sense power is decentralizing to the private sector particularly, and to some extent to civil society. We have tended to be very much government oriented, and we need to really think in terms of the constellation of power centers in various countries, developing countries and also developed countries. What amazes me is that people talk about evaluation capacity development in developing countries as if we don't need evaluation capacity development in Europe. or in the United States. I mean, the GAO evaluation unit has essentially been killed by the auditors. Evaluation capacity needs to be built everywhere. We are too few. I was mentioning yesterday at dinner that the best number we have is that we have 33. We have like 30,000 members of Evaluation Association worldwide. With internal auditing, a single Institute of Internal Auditing has 120,000 members, and we have 30,000. I mean, we are still a fledgling industry, but it is the industry that needs to be grown, and to grow it, we must infiltrate our competitors, and we must also connect to the private sector, because corporate social responsibility, I mean, the problem in the private sector is that they are confusing auditing with evaluation. I mean, this has even happened in the United Kingdom when they turned the ICAI to KPMG. So we have to infiltrate the auditing profession. We have to try to get them to understand evaluation. We have got to connect to the civil society, who should not be as our evaluation either. And it's only by operating in these three sectors that we can hope to inject evaluation in governance situations which make it very hard, which make it even dangerous for evaluators to be independent. So we need to look for And I know that the FID is looking at this question of the demand side of evaluation in Africa. And I hope that study leads us to some interesting conclusions. Again, this is the whole agenda for evaluation research, which I hope will be taken up by somebody.
Bob, can I just pick up on the question that was asked about Africa, because I've had direct experience of that. And it is a practical issue that I think needs to be highlighted in an event like this. Because of the decentralization of evaluation by many donors, people are often looking for comments and inputs and demands from people in developing countries. And people in developing countries are only getting one source of information, which is an intensive series of training programs that basically say attribution is the nature of evaluation as a whole, even going beyond the notion of impact evaluation. And when you add up the money that's gone in, and I have done the figures, that's gone into JPAL, 3IE, and World Bank programs that are follow particular methodologies, and you compare it with the money that's gone into other kinds of evaluation training, we are talking about billions in one hand and £5 in the other hand. And I actually think that all of this training is valid and important, and I do value the fact that it's the training that I've seen 3IE and JPAL doing. But what is very nerve-wracking is to watch this happening only from one orientation, leading to a very unbalanced set of requests that are then coming back to donors as if they are, this is what demand for evaluation is in the field, because that's all that they've been exposed to. And I think that one of the, when I used the term platform earlier, one of the platforms I think we need to think about is platforms that offer a more diversified set of capacity building, learning and training inputs that will give a more balanced and rounded possibility of demand, to use your term, than we have at the moment. And I just want to park that as being something that we perhaps talk about in other settings over the next day or two.
But, I think this is very much the point also I was trying to make earlier. The thing is, we have got to try to protect our brand as to what the hell is evaluation. Because now, basically, we are being squeezed by, on the one hand, the attribution lobby, in a sense, is really essentially doing social science research, which is fine, and attribution is an important question, and one cannot deny that. But is that really what we're really about? What is the core of evaluation? I think we must, are we all agreed it has to do with the merit, worth, and value of things? If we are talking about merit, worth, and value, attribution is a very small part of this agenda. And that's what we need to articulate. We need to say what evaluation is and protect it and promote it and not be shy of it, because we are different from the rest. That's my view. But I know Elliot may have different views. But the thing is, I think we, in the whole attribution question, we need to focus on what is evaluation and try to live up to what that definition is, rather than fudging it. Merit, worth, and value, I think, is a perfectly good way to define our mission.